Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff Mangan, Commissioner of Political Practices. Thank you for joining us. With me today is Scott Cook, legal investigator, compliance specialist from the Office of Commissioner of Political Practices, and Sam Sell from MAR is manning the Zoom chat line and question line, and so we're happy to be with you this morning. It's a little bit different for us. We did this yesterday, Zoom only, and it worked out well. Just a couple of reminders to keep your computers muted. I think we've muted them for you from here. And if you do have a question, just go ahead and add that to your chat, the chat function, and we will read that and make sure everybody's question gets answered. The format is set up. We're going to walk you through the campaign electronic reporting system and how to report. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll skip from the PowerPoint presentation straight into the CSRS online database and show you live how to report contributions, expenditures, and some other features of CSRS. We've set up this Zoom training to stop at different periods of time for questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and chat or go ahead and type it in. And when we take questions, we'll answer it at that time, or if it's a place where we can break in while we're explaining through the workshop, we'll certainly add it at that point. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just so everybody knows that we are recording this presentation, and we will have that available via link on the website at some point following the presentation. To navigate to CSRS, we're going to show you how to get there in a second. But so everybody knows that there is a 30-some page guide, and a candidate and treasurer guide to navigating the campaign electronic reporting system via PDF on the website. So we will walk through many features today, but this is a pretty complete guide with screenshots. So we recommend that you know where it is. We'll show you here in a second, and you can certainly download it. And if you do come to any crossroads or snafus or questions, check out that guide, and your question will probably be answered. That being said, as most of you know, you can certainly call our office and we will assist you. You can email us at cpphelp@mt.gov, and we will answer those emails as quickly as possible. We also have Zoom available for one-on-one discussions if we have to. That's another feature that if someone is truly struggling, and if it would make it easier for us to Zoom you and kind of walk you through that process with two screens, we're more than willing to do that. And of course, while we're in Helena, if you're ever in Helena, if you need to stop by, our door is always open, and you're always welcome to stop in and spend as much time with the staff as you need. So let me show you where this guide is really quickly. It'll also show you how we're going to move in and out between the internet and the PowerPoint presentation. So if you navigate to politicalpractices.mt.gov, you'll find the web page with with all the information there. You know you're on the web page if you see my picture. If you click online services and you scroll down here on the left-hand side, you'll see this information about the CSRS system, how to access the CSRS system. But right here, you'll see Candidate and Treasurer Guide to Navigating. You click on that link, and this PDF is going to pop up. It's a large PDF, so it takes a few seconds. There you go, 38 pages. You don't have to download and print the 38 pages right now, but as you can see, It's available to you at your fingertips at any time, and it's a wonderful resource. And so we highly suggest that you download it and utilize it. We'll go back to the PowerPoint. And talk about the reports that are on the source system, things that you need to report, and how to report. Every one of you hopefully have already submitted your statement of candidate form, which is a C1 or C1A if you're a local candidate. That needed to be done with 5 days of you filing. If you haven't, there are approximately 14 folks we're calling today that haven't sent in all of their forms. If you haven't sent in a C1 or C1A state candidate form, please do so today, or you will not be eligible for the ballot after 5 p.m. today. I'm pretty sure if you've joined us and you've taken the steps so far to work to this process, you're probably good. But if you haven't, get in hold of our office and make sure that that gets in. Just a reminder, if you update your C1 or C1A, if you're changing your treasurer, you'd have a change of address, your email changes, or you're adding a deputy treasurer, for example, you need to update that C1 or C1A within 5 days of the change. Please note that our first point of contact with most candidates and your campaigns is your email address. We utilize the email address that's on your C1 or C1A. So make sure that the most current used email address is on your statement of candidate. You should know by now that Montana has some of the strictest campaign finance limits in the country. You can find campaign finance limits on our website. Campaign finance limits apply to each election. We'll talk about that more in just a second. And aggregate limits apply from a political party committee for candidates and from independent PACs for legislative candidates. So if you're a legislative candidate, you can receive up to $1,850 from independent committees, or for the state Senate, $3,050. If you're already packed out and you've hit that aggregate amount as a legislative candidate and receive a check from an independent committee, simply return the check. They'll understand that you're packed out. Please note that corporations or unions cannot provide money directly to a candidate. You cannot receive a corporate contribution, whether that's a cash contribution or an in-kind contribution. So just make sure that if a business writes you a check, that you cannot accept it if they're a corporation. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well as we move on. I noted that contribution limits apply per election. So if you have a primary opponent, you have 2 elections. You have an election in the primary and you have an election in the general. If you do not have a primary opponent, you only have 1 election. That's the general election. So if you do have a primary and are receiving contributions for both elections, we suggest that you have a separate account for those funds and keep them separate. You cannot use general election funds contributions in your primary. However, if you do have primary election funds remaining after the primary, you can move that to your general election account. We will go ahead and start right into how to report contributions using the SERS system. Let's go back for a second. We're going to be talking about contributions from individuals, contributions from committees, under $35 contributions, which you can put in as a mass contribution under fundraisers, refunds, and loans, and contributions from yourself. In order to properly report, you're going to, and we're going to show you this in just a second, you're going to select the current campaign finance report, or you're going to start a new campaign finance report. We suggest that during the reporting period, when you start your campaign finance report, start it early in the reporting period and update it periodically through the reporting period. And so you're not racing to get everything done on the last day. If you do that, which many candidates do, unfortunately, a few things can happen. The system can get slowed down. You may miss your reporting deadline because for whatever reason. If you have a question or on how to report something, it's less likely you'll reach someone in our office in a timely manner on that last day of reporting. You can imagine that with hundreds of candidates and potentially hundreds of questions, a staff of 4 or 5 certainly can't get to every question in that last 8-hour period. So we suggest that you update and amend your report throughout the reporting period. And just so you know that if you do that, the data that you're putting in is not public until you file the report. The only folks that can see your report in this pending status is yourself and my staff. So when you log into CSRS in your first campaign finance report, you're going to see the following items. For those of you that have utilized CSRS before, you're going to see a couple of changes. We just updated the user interface in January. So when you log on, you're going to see 2 rows of tabs. You're going to see main tabs of contributions, expenditures, debts, payments, summary, file, and help. And each of those has a sub-tab. The contribution sub-tabs are individuals, committee, fundraiser, refunds, loan, self, and help. So 2 main changes is it used to say Schedule A, Schedule B. It simply tells you what they are now, which makes it easier for candidates to report. And we've added these help tabs. If you select one of the help tabs, it'll tell you about each of these tabs and what their function is, and a little about each one. And the help tab here will tell you a little bit about each of these tabs and how to properly report, including links to outside the CSRS system, to additional resources such as guidance PDFs, and perhaps the code, Montana code. So to add an individual contribution when you're in CSRS, through that, and you're in that, you're going to click the add button, and a box is going to pop up that defaults to row details. For those of you that's used CSRS before, the default used to be the entity search. That's still available. It's just not the default tab. It's the second tab. The entity search searches the entire database for that contributor if that person has contributed to your campaign and or contributed to other campaigns, and their information is within the database. To utilize that, you simply select the entity type, individual, put in their last and first name, and hit search. It first searches your local, record, and if you hit a second, and if they cannot find that person under your records, it'll say not found. You hit search again, it searches the entire database of all campaigns, and you may have several folks that come up, and you need to look for the correct one and select the correct one. Or you can just go to row details and enter all the information manually, name, address, etc. If you do use the entity search, and if you select the individual, they'll come up with name and address and the fields to complete the rest of the information that's required, which is full name and complete mailing address, occupation, and employer. Please note that consultant, for example, be specific. Consultant, for example, is not alone is not acceptable. Provide the type of consultant they may be, or the type of sales, for example, they might be. Retired is acceptable. Self-employed in the name of the person's business is acceptable. NA is not acceptable. So if you have any questions as you're going through that, if you just let us know, and we'll be more than happy to assist you with that. But it's pretty much self-explanatory. If you can understand, and I believe everyone understands that sales is fairly is not specific, but plumbing sales, for example, is very specific. When you hit submit, and we're going to tell you throughout this process that this little blue save button in CSRS is your best friend. So whenever you hit submit, you're going to hit save. When you hit save, the item you just entered is saved in the system, and you'll see the success. The candidate finance report was successfully saved for your account. And you will see the entry that you just placed within your system in front of you. We got some background noise just as. So apologize for that. Just a couple of items here. Remember, all contributions over $35 are required to be reported with all the info, including employer and occupation. In-kind contributions also count towards contribution limits. And if you do receive an in-kind contribution of a service or an item, it's your responsibility to assign a fair market value for that in-kind contribution. A common question to the Commissioner's office is, do I determine fair market value? Our staff got to determine what that fair market value is. Utilize Google, utilize common sense, and ask colleagues if you have a further question. It should be fairly easy to determine. Okay, we're going to go ahead and add a couple of contributions. I'm going to turn over to Scott here and to show you how to log into CSRS and to add a couple of individual contributions. So Scott.
Yeah, so again, my name is Scott. I am a compliance specialist with the CoPP office. So I may have talked to some of you folks via telephone or email response already. So as the Commissioner was saying, I'm going to show you how to enter some individual contributions in the CSRS system. To do that, we have to back up a little bit and actually log into the CSRS system. So I'm going to show you how to do that. As he was saying earlier in the presentation, you can access CSRS on this online services section of the website. There's an access CSRS button here. There's one right above the link to the candidate and treasurer guide. There's also a link right on our homepage. So if you go to Commissioner Political Practices, so politicalpractices.mt.gov, and right on our homepage here, there's a picture of the commissioner just on the right side of the screen. There's an Access CSRS button right there. So you can access CSRS directly from our homepage. So if you click that Access CSRS link, that's going to take you to the Campaign Electronic Reporting System dashboard. This is basically just the homepage for CSRS. To actually log in, you need to click this Access My Accounts icon. It's a little green button here kind of towards the bottom of the screen. That is the proper portal to actually log into the system. Clicking that is going to take you to ePass Montana. One of the common questions we get is somebody forgot their ePass Montana username, or they forgot their ePass Montana password, because it is ePass Montana stuff that is used to authenticate in CSRS essentially. We do not control ePass Montana, so if you've forgotten your username or password, that is something you may have to settle up with the ePass folks. We can't really help you there, unfortunately. It is kind of a statewide authentication tool, so it's not something we have any control on. I'm actually going to go back here, and you want to click that login button for ePass Montana. Again, with ePass Montana. So that will take you to where you enter in your username and password. Enter in your username and password. The username and password do have to be paired with a specific CSRS profile in order to come up with anything. If you have not registered in CSRS before, or you don't think your ePass is tied to the CSRS profile, feel free to give us a call. Our compliance specialists can help out and make sure your ePass is tied to the CSRS profile so that when you log in through ePass like I just did, you're actually redirected to the right place and have access to your campaign profile. Assuming you're already tied, you'll see each campaign that your ePass account is tied to. So you see here we're tied to a J-Coffee campaign from 2018 and a J-Coffee campaign from 2020. Today we're just going to deal with that 2020 campaign because that's the campaign most of you folks are exclusively dealing with at this time. So to do anything with that campaign, to look at things, to change things, whatever you want to do, you click the box next to the candidate name of the proper candidate. And then if you want to add a new registration, which most of you, if not all of you, have already done, you'd click the Add New Registration button. If you want to look at the registration, so that's the registration, I should clarify, is the C1 or C1A statement of candidate. If you want to view that document, you click View Registration. If you need to amend it to change something, so say your treasurer's email address has changed or your campaign phone number has changed, anything like that, you click the Amend Registration button. For finance reports, you want to click the Finance Reports icon. So I'm going to click Finance Reports so that we can take a look at Mr. Coffey's finance reports. And that's going to take you to this page, the campaign report list. So it's going to show all campaign finance reports that this candidate has filed or is currently working on. As you can see, for Mr. Coffey, the report is pending. As the commissioner previously explained, a pending report can only be seen by yourself or CoPP staff. It is not publicly accessible when it is pending. So we recommend you go in, start a report, work on it periodically in advance of a reporting deadline. And that way, when you get to the deadline, say, for example, on Friday of this week, all you'll have to do is file that report. You won't have to enter stuff like I'm going to show you here. And it's much easier for you to get an answer to a question, get assistance or guidance if you call in advance of that reporting deadline. To actually, if say you need to add a new report, you'd click this Add New C5 button. To update an existing report, like we're going to do here, or add things to a report you've already started working on, you click Update or Amend Report. And so that actually takes you into the guts of the report, really. This is where you would enter contributions in the contribution tab. We'll get to the expenditures, debts, payments, etc. a little bit later in this presentation. Right now, we're going to focus on the contributions tab. You see we have individuals. So this is where you put contributions from an individual other than the candidate. So as you can see, we've already entered a couple. Any that you've previously entered will show up here in this window like this. To add a new one, like we're going to do here, you click the Add button. So it's this little plus sign at the very bottom of the screen. And that pulls up your row details and entity search page. If you want to use the entity search, and those of you who have previous experience from CSRS probably remember you were forced to use the entity search. You can search an entity by name, so bank, business, or individual. If you're confident that they've already contributed to your campaign or already contributed to somebody else's campaign and that's been entered in CSRS, you can use the entity search to find that relevant result. If you know it's someone that has not been used before, or you're very certain that they haven't been, or you just don't want to use the entity search, you're not required to use that. You can go straight to row details and enter everything in manually. So the first piece of information it asks for is election type. Your options are primary or general. If it's a contribution for the primary, you choose primary. If it's a contribution for the general, choose general. We're going to go with primary for this one. Date is the next piece of information you need to enter. That's just the date you received the contribution. Last name is the last name of the person who made the contribution. So you just type in their last name. First name, same thing, the first name of the person who made the contribution. Street address is the address where they are located. So basically wherever they live, they should be providing that information for you. If they're not, that is something that you need to get from them. City, state, and zip is obviously a required component of their address information. A common question we get is in the state field. People pull it up and they say, we can't find Montana. I don't know where Montana is in your drop-down menu. It is at the very top. So if you scroll all the way down to the M's, you won't see Montana. That's because it's at the top. Occupation and employer is required for all contributors of $35 or more. We recommend if you put it in as an individual contribution, you just put in occupation and employer anyway. It saves you potential headaches down the road, saves you having to enter that input later, things of that nature. And again, we want you to be as specific as possible. So like say, I say they're a consultant. You're gonna hear from the CoPP later saying that's not specific enough. You need to know what type of consultant. Something like TV entertainment, if I can spell, would actually be acceptable. Basically, we just need a brief description of what type of consultant. We're not asking for the blood and guts detail of what they do on a day-to-day basis. We just need to know what type of consultant they are, essentially. Oops, and I put that in employer. That's okay. Just as long as you have these two in the two fields, that is fine. So generally, you want to put employer and employer and occupation in occupation. So I kind of screwed that one up here, but that's okay. As long as you have that information, we're fine.
We'll accept it.
Yeah, we're not gonna come back to you and say, oh, you screwed those two fields up. How dare you? Nothing like that. Cash or check amount, you just put in the amount of the contribution. So I'm going to say this person gave $160 in cash. In-kind value is if they gave you an in-kind contribution. You need to put in the value of that contribution here. And I'm going to say this individual gave a $20 in-kind contribution. They gave a $20 Best Buy gift card for the candidate to raffle off or silent auction off later. So you put that information in this in-kind description field here. If you've entered everything in all the fields here, hit that submit button. That's the green icon down towards the bottom of the screen. It's going to pop up in here. Make sure you hit the save button. If you don't hit that save button and you navigate out of a report, start another entry, anything like that, you may lose that data. The system might take the name of the previous entry and run that again for this entry. It might duplicate the amount. All sorts of weird things can happen. So make sure you hit the save button after every entry. And you do that for every single individual contribution you've received. It's that same process.
Scott, I know we've had some questions from previous trainings, if you could address. One is candidates that receive contributions through electronic services such as ActBlue or PayPal. How do they?
Okay, so we'll get into the back half of this a little bit more with expenditures, but I'll touch on it now since we have questions about it. Any contribution you receive from an electronic provider, so ActBlue, PayPal, anything of that nature, you enter the individual contribution, just like I entered this previous one, for the full amount. So say Tweety Bird gave the $160 via ActBlue. You still report receiving the $160 contribution from that individual on the date they made the contribution as an individual contribution. And then say ActBlue takes a $5 service fee or PayPal takes a $5 service fee from that contribution. You would actually enter that as an expenditure over in the expenditures tab. We'll get to that in a little bit more detail in a bit, but you would enter that as a $5 expenditure. So you enter a $160 contribution received and a $5 expenditure made.
Right. So the bottom line is if they receive $160 from ActBlue, but they're only receiving $155 because of the $5 service fee, the contribution is still $160.
Correct. They still report the
Yep.
full $160 contribution.
$160, and then you put a $5 expenditure in for the fee under expenditures. Thanks, Scott. And then another common question is, what happens if I receive a contribution over the contribution limit? For example, someone gives me a $200 contribution. How do I deal with that?
So that's another common question we get. That is a good question. So you would, again, just like with the ActBlue, you would report the entire contribution you received from that individual. So we'll say Daffy Duck gave you $200 instead of $180 I entered. You would report a $200 contribution from Mr. Daffy Duck. And then if you refunded him $20 so that he was down to the contribution limit, you didn't exceed that limit, you report that $20 refund as an expenditure to Mr. Daffy Duck.
Thank you, Scott. We'll see if there are any other questions through Zoom. Sam?
Yes, we've got a few questions here. First is, say you had a candidate who's married and both the candidate and their spouse contributed to the campaign. Are both of those, is the spouse's contribution a self-contribution as well? This is provided that they are married and file their taxes jointly.
Is the question is a spouse of the candidate or just a contribution from a married couple to a candidate itself? I don't want to
Sure.
read the question again.
Okay, let's try this again. Is a self-contribution covering married couples who file jointly, or is it strictly by their Social Security?
Okay. We consider, so I'm just assuming that the question that the candidate is talking about himself. The self tab is all about the candidate. So we'll talk about that in more detail here in a bit. But the candidate can give himself unlimited, him or herself unlimited contributions and or loans. The spouse can only provide up to the campaign finance limit. In that case, if a candidate would put his or her contributions to him or herself under the self tab, and the contribution from the spouse under the individuals tab.
Okay, so it doesn't matter then what their tax status is.
No.
Okay, great. Next question: are any of the fields optional for contributions of less than $35?
So for contributions of less than $35, we'll get into those in a little more detail, specifically those that are received at a mass collection event. You can, if they're all collected at one event, aggregate them in this fundraiser tab, which we'll get to a little bit later. However, if you're entering them in the individual tab, and it is an under $35 contribution, the occupation and employer information is not required. That is only required once someone meets or exceeds that $35 number. However, if you're going to enter them in the individual tab, we do recommend you just enter that information regardless of the amount of the contribution.
Okay.
That way you don't have to go back in and look for that, try to find it, and try to furiously contact that individual. You already have it.
Okay, last question that we have so far. The 30-page guide to using CERS appears to have been updated in late February, and this participant downloaded it in February, printed it, and was wondering if there were any substantive changes made since then that he needs to be aware of.
So the version that is currently online is the most up-to-date version. I can't remember exactly when we put the finishing touches on it. I do believe it was late January or early February. So they might want to double check the version they have versus what's currently on the web. But I do believe they more than likely have the up-to-date version.
It says February 2020 on the front. They should have the most up-to-date version.
Yeah, updated February 28, 2020. So they'll want to check that information.
Thank you. We're going to head back to the PowerPoint, talk about committee contributions and fundraisers, then we'll get back in and show you how, show you where to add a committee contribution. And we'll give you a couple of examples of under $35 fundraising activities and how you can report those. Most candidates will be receiving contributions from two main committees, political party committees and independent committees. A political party, they both have aggregate amounts for a political party committee can give up to so much in total to a candidate. Independent committees, the legislative candidates do have aggregate limits that we discussed earlier. To record a committee contribution, you simply go to your contributions tab, find the committee tab, you'll hit the add button again, back there, and it'll ask you pretty much the same information, similar information that you put in for your other contributions. Name, address. You have an entity search. You can look for previous that committee under entity search, or you can enter it manually under row details. It's a fairly simple process with the amount. Remember, independent committees also have a finance limit of $180. Aggregate for legislative candidates, county candidates can take $180 from, there is no aggregate limit from independent committees for candidates. Fundraisers. The fundraiser tab under the contributions tab, sub-tab. This is where we're going to ask you to report and record any under $35 contributions that you may raise in a fundraiser activity that was under $35 from those individuals. A couple of things I need you to keep in mind, however. The main item is Montana law does not allow anonymous contributions. So we ask you that you keep track of those who attend a fundraiser event, and you can do that a couple of ways. For example, keep a list of folks that attend a fundraising, say meet the candidate event. Keep a list of all those who attended that. If you have a pass a hat at that event, we suggest that in the basket that you place envelopes so folks can place their names on those envelopes. If you're having a raffle or some other silent auction, a ticketed item is an easy way to maintain a list of folks that bought those tickets. But again, your best bet is to keep a list of all the names of all the folks that attend those events. You can report all under $35 as a mass contribution. We're going to show you how to do that in a second. As Scott said in the earlier section, you can report all those contributions as well under the individual tab with the name and address. And when you file the report, it will still report them all as mass under 35 contributions unless you select the option to name those individuals, which we'll talk about under filing. So to add a fundraiser, we want you to keep in mind that fundraisers are any events, any specific event that you're collecting many contributions under $35, for example, a pass the hat. You're going to click add the event. When you click add, you're going to go to an add fundraiser screen, which will ask a couple of different things. So this is new. This is part of the new user interface for those who've used SERS before. You're still going to select election type, select the date of the fundraiser. We're going to ask you to place the name of the fundraiser, and that's where you can start being specific. Meet and greet dash pass the hat. meet and greet dash raffle, meet and greet silent auction, those type of things. Location and the venue in city, coffee bar, Bozeman, a brewery. I don't want to name any specific ones, but whatever that location might have been. And then we're going to ask you either to list the number of attendees or the number of tickets sold, depending on the type of fundraising activity it was that's most relevant to that. Then the amount of the aggregate collected, and we'll give you an example here in a second. You also have an option to provide any in-kind values that were under $35 and a description of that as well. We've provided some tips within the page where you report. And once you successfully add that fundraiser and select save, you'll see success, that green check mark that you'll come to recognize when you save in the entry, and you will see the fundraiser event that you added within the screen. Again, keep track of all under $35 contributions. The best way to do that is keep track of everyone that comes to your event. Let's go ahead and add. Why don't we add a committee contribution and a fundraiser contribution?
So entering a committee contribution is pretty similar to entering any individual contribution. The biggest difference is you use this committee tab here. So right next door to the individuals tab, just click on that tab. If you've already entered any committee contributions, those are going to pull up here. So anything you've previously entered will show here. To add a new one, you click the add button like you did for an individual contribution. This is a good opportunity. I'm going to run through the entity search real quick. So to run the entity search, you click entity search. For entity type, you choose basically what type of committee the contribution was from. Most common for candidates are independent, which is your PACs, your political action committees, or a political party committee. That can be your state Democratic Party, state Republican Party, Republican Women, Young Democrats, all those types of organizations would be political party organizations. I'm going to say I got a contribution from an independent committee. And you type in the name of the committee into the search bar under entity name and go ahead and click that search button. That is going to search your campaign. So I've already used these guys as an example. So to select them, I click the button next to their name and click select. If say nothing came up, I'd click this search all campaigns button and hit search again. That's going to search the entries from every entity that uses SIRS to report. Again, they show up again because they've been entered in SIRS. So you click the box next to their name and click select. That uses them as the entity. So you've got that taken care of. It's still going to ask for election type. Again, if it's a primary contribution, choose primary. If it's a general contribution, choose general. Date is the date the contribution was made. So you put that in the date field. Cash check amount is obviously the amount of the contribution. If there's an in-kind contribution, you put the in-kind value in the in-kind value field and in-kind description in the in-kind description field. If you've entered everything that you need to, you click submit. And then make sure you hit the save button. Again, I cannot stress enough, please hit the save button after every entry you make. I know it's a little bit of a pain, but it saves you from potentially losing data, having data changed, names changed, things like that. It can save a lot of headaches if you do it that way. So that's a committee contribution. Unless we have any questions about that, I'm going to go ahead and move ahead to fundraiser. Okay, so it doesn't seem like we have any pressing questions. If you think of one later, please feel free to ask it. We will have more opportunities. So I'm going to go to fundraiser now. So you click the fundraiser tab. Again, as the commissioner was saying, this fundraiser tab is for mass collection events, where you collect proceeds of under $35 from individuals. In the event, I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but I want to stress it again. In the event, say you collect $10 from somebody to pass the hat, $10 another pass the hat, and then they write you a $30 check. They have now contributed more than $35, that individual. All their contributions need to, from that point forward, be reported in the individuals tab. You would not report their small $10 contributions received at a fundraiser event in the fundraiser tab because they've exceeded that $35 threshold. And so keep that in mind. That's why we strongly recommend you keep names, et cetera, for contributors at your mass collection events. To add a new one, you click this add button. Just like you would for any other contribution, you choose the election type. Date of fundraiser is the date that the event was held. Name of fundraiser is a really good place for you to start explaining what this fundraiser was. So if it's a meet and greet, you can say meet and greet. If it's a raffle, you can say raffle. If it's a silent auction, you can say silent auction. It's going to ask you for the location, so venue and city, basically just asking where the event was held. So you just basically give us the information on where that event was held. It's going to ask for number of attendees and number of tickets sold. And this is really kind of an either or option. If it's a ticketed event, so say a fundraising dinner where participants have to buy a ticket, a raffle, something like that, you'd put in number of tickets sold because you're selling tickets to the event. If it's something more like a pass the hat, a meet and greet where individuals can get in without, say, paying money for a ticket, you probably want to put in number of attendees. Okay, so we're going to say this was a pass the hat event. So we want to put that in the name of fundraiser. Because it's pass the hat, we're going to say it's number of participants involved, so number of attendees. And then the cash check amount, this is where you put in the aggregate of those under $35 contributions received. Keep in mind, if you say, for example, our event had 12 attendees and I raised $1,000, so the fundraiser tab would not be an appropriate place to keep that information. So just keep things like that in mind. If you receive any in-kind things, you'd put, of course, in-kind value in the in-kind value field and a description of the item or service received in the in-kind description. If you scroll down here at the bottom of the page, you've got some tips on what the fundraiser tab is meant to report. And a reminder that each unique fundraiser activity needs to be reported separately. So if you had a meet and greet in Helena, for example, and as part of that there was a silent auction and a pass the hat, those would be two separate fundraisers. They would need to be reported separately. Once you've entered everything, you hit the submit button. And then just like for anything else in SIRS, after you've entered it, hit the save button. So do we have any pressing questions about entering fundraisers?
Sure we will.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yes. So, first question: contributions could potentially be dated as the date the check is written, the date the check envelope is postmarked, or the date the check is received in the mail, or the date the check is deposited, or maybe another date. What is the correct date the contribution is made to be reported in CERS?
So you used the date the contribution is made. So, like, for example, let's say someone wrote the check on March 8th, and you received it on March 12th and deposited it on March 15th. You would still use the date the check was written as the contribution date, not the date that you received it and not the date that you deposited it.
Okay. We have a question about purchases the candidate makes using their personal funds for the campaign. And what are the, maybe a way to approach this is what are the various ways that can be accounted for, including how would a loan work?
So we'll get to this in the next set of slides here. So we're just about to get there.
So if you can hold on, I believe every one of those questions will be answered on that. Additional questions on
I have a question
fundraisers?
about fundraisers that pass the hat. If you have
Yes, this is a question that gets back to fair market value, maybe just a review of that. How would you account for the value of the prize that was raffled off? Say it's a gift card or a work of art the candidate created.
Again, we cannot provide what that value would be. Use common sense. Ask, if it's a work of art, perhaps take a look at what other artists are, selling pieces or something on perhaps, eBay or something. It's just something that's the responsibility of the candidate. And believe me, I wish I could say, the fair market value of that person's art is this. I can't. That's up to the candidate to determine. Just as long as it makes sense. Just use common sense.
Okay, one last question. Where would one, and this relates to the question that was just asked, where does one enter the value then?
For an in-kind item? So there's that in-kind value field.
If it's under $35, you can be on the fundraiser tab, and we just saw that. But also, when you add a contribution, an individual contribution, you will see a field for in-kind amount and in-kind description. That's where you would enter that. So you'd put the same amount of information: name, address, occupation, employer, and then rather than a cash contribution, you would put in an in-kind contribution of $150 with the description of what that item was, $150
2 tickets
gift
to
cards,
Utah Jazz game to raffle off, something of that nature.
So, but it's all under the contributions tab. You'll find an individual tab, and you'll find it also under the fundraiser.
Great. So prizes that are raffled off are in-kind contributions.
Yep.
One last.
Again, they have to be an in-kind. It can't be an in-kind contribution from a corporation. So just keep all those. Everything that applies to a cash contribution applies to an in-kind contribution, including a limit, including corporations can't provide, etc. So just keep that in mind. Just treat it as cash.
About fundraisers
you'll understand.
and meet and greet. I have a question. When you have 100 people.
So we've got a couple of more tabs, and then we'll get into expenditures, and then we may be out of here by quarter to 12.
100 people.
12. We're doing good on time. We've added a tab for refunds, etc. This may not be used very much, but it used to be, this information used to have to be reported under the fundraising tab, which didn't make a lot of sense to folks and was confusing. So if you receive a refund from as perhaps a purchase that your campaign made and you received a refund back, or you have account interest, those kind of monies into the campaign can be reported under the refund, etc. tab. So if you get a rebate of $30 from an office supply store, you have $5 of interest for the period from the bank, those type of things. It won't be used very often, but it's there if you need it. Now we're going to talk about loans and candidate and candidate contributions to him or herself. So first of all, loans from anyone else aside from the candidate to him or herself, contribution limits apply. So a spouse or a friend or another family member cannot loan the campaign $1,000. The amount that they can loan the campaign is up to that individual's, that campaign's contribution limit. So if you're a legislative candidate, you can be loaned up to $180 from another individual or a family member. You can, however, loan yourself unlimited amounts, an unlimited amount of money. The same applies to contributions. You can provide yourself a contribution of an unlimited amount, contributions from family members, spouse, parents, children, etc. the campaign finance limit applies. The guidance we provide to candidates is determine early on whether or not the money that you're putting in for yourself is either a loan or a contribution. If you put it in as a loan, you can pay yourself back throughout the campaign or at the end of the campaign if you have funds available. That's thus a loan. If you place it in as a contribution, you are giving that money to the campaign and you are not paying yourself back. So if you want to pay yourself back, place it in as a loan. At the end of the campaign, if you have money to pay yourself back, that is absolutely acceptable. If you don't have money to pay yourself back, you can always forgive the loan to your campaign and it turns into a contribution. It does not work in reverse, however. You can't give yourself money as a contribution early in the campaign and then realize you had money left over to pay yourself back. That doesn't work that way. So if you think you want your money back that you're putting into your campaign, place it initially in as a loan. Or you can do a combination of both. That's certainly up to you. Of the previous question is how do we handle using personal credit cards or personal funds? Our first and probably the most important guidance that we'll provide you is please do not use a personal credit card or personal debit card for campaign expenditures. You should all have a campaign account open by now. Please request from your bank a debit card on that account and use the debit card for those type of purchases, not your personal card or your personal debit card. It's cleaner. It makes recording those expenditures easier. It's just a much better way to report your campaign activity. That being said, if you do use a personal credit card, you can certainly report it again as either a loan or a contribution, which if you expect to pay yourself back with campaign funds, put it in as a loan. For that amount that you may have used a personal credit card to buy 30 yard signs or something for $550. Again, I do not suggest you do that, but if you do, you can put it in as a loan and pay yourself back. You do, however, have to maintain the invoice and if required for anything down the road, we need to have access to that, potentially have access to that credit card information. Again, that's why we ask that you do not use a personal credit card. So please don't intermix.
And I think this is a good time for me. Another common question we get is if someone pays for items or services with a personal card on behalf of the campaign. So say you personally buy those yard signs using your personal credit card and you want to pay yourself back from the campaign. Those types of activities would be reported in kind in the loans tab because it's not actual cash going to your campaign account. Instead, it's a good or service going to your campaign. So if you write a check for $1,000 from your account to your campaign account that you want to pay back, you would report that as a cash or check loan because that is money that's changing accounts. For items or services you pay for out of pocket, those would all be reported as in kind.
We'll show you an example of that here in just a second. And then the same applies to the contribution tab. So we do realize that the legislature a couple of sessions ago made that reporting your filing fee mandatory. I think they forgot that most candidates pay their filing fee prior to setting up their campaign finance accounts. So it almost forces you to use your own money before you even set up an account. So if you paid your filing fee with either a credit card or your personal cash, you would set that up either in your self-contributions tab or loan tab, and we're going to show you an example of that here in just a second. A couple of nice things to use if you're using your own, if you're loaning yourself money, when you enter that and you select the entity type, add candidate loan, or it's going to say add candidate contribution in the self-contributions tab. Select that option. It'll pull up your information. So if you don't select that option, it may it may apply the contribution limit to you. So always use add candidate loan or add candidate contribution tab when it entity when it appears. And we'll show you that here in just a minute as well. Again, make sure you hit save. You'll see the green success save, and you'll see the loan that you just placed into your record.
I think we've already covered
Already
most
covered
of that.
that. Candidate contributions, we've covered that. Here's an example of just contributing, of making a self-contribution for your filing fee, in-kind value 100. You see the in-kind value, not the check value, in-kind value of $100, in-kind description, filing fee for county commissioner. Hit submit. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So we're going to go and enter a couple of more. We're almost done with contributions. Scott?
So since we just talked about them, I'm going to enter one loan and one self-contribution. Since it's a very common question we get, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a loan from the candidate himself. So you choose the loan tab. To add a new loan, you click that add button, the plus sign looking thing. So if it's from a person who's not the candidate, you can go through the entity search or manually enter like you would for any contribution. For the candidate, you have this nifty add candidate loan button. That pulls up the candidate as the entity immediately. I'm going to select that option and CJ Coffee appears. It's still going to ask for the election type, just like all other contributions. So choose primary or general, whichever is appropriate. Date is the date where the loan was made. Occupation and employer information is generally it is required, just like for any contribution, within reason, of course. If you put candidates, for HD5 candidate county commission, for a candidate loan, we're generally okay with that. That's generally fine. If you want to put in the occupation and employer, you are certainly welcome to. Cash check amount is if the loan is cash. So say Jay Coffee wrote a check from his personal account to his campaign account, you put it in cash check amount. Since we were talking about it, I'm going to use the example. A lot of candidates pay their filing fee out of pocket because they register before they have a campaign account, or maybe before they have funds in their campaign account. So they have to use personal funds, which is totally fine for the filing fee. And say Jay Coffee had to pay his filing fee out of pocket. He wants to pay himself back from campaign funds if he can at the end of the campaign. You'd put the filing fee amount in as the in-kind value. So however much you paid for that filing fee goes in the in-kind value. An in-kind description, we are totally fine for a filing fee with filing fee. We know what that means. People know what that means. That's fine. Once you've entered everything, you hit submit. And then make sure, like for any other entry, you hit the save button. And again, the reason I chose in-kind instead of cash for the value, so I use this in-kind value tab, is because it's not actually $15 going to the campaign account. He just paid out of pocket and wishes to have the option to pay himself back. So if I'd gone cash check amount, the SIR system would add $15 to the cash balance for this campaign account, which we know is not actually the case based on this activity. To do a self-contribution, you use the self tab. So again, you click over to the self tab and click the add button. It's already going to pull up the candidate as the entity because there is literally no other option in the self contributions tab. For election type, you just choose the election type where the contribution was made. If it's a cash or check amount, you put in cash or check amount. So say he contributed $100 to his campaign and he has no expectation of getting that money paid back. It's just a contribution to the campaign. It goes in cash check amount. Another common question we get that works with this example is a lot of candidates use like old yard signs, for example, or other old campaign materials from previous campaigns. They contribute those to their current campaign to be used in the present. Those do need to be reported at fair market value as an in-kind contribution to the current campaign. So I'm going to say we donated $1,000 in kind because we're reusing 100. Let's go 2016. Oops. Because we were using 100 2016 Vote for Coffee yard signs. So basically he printed 100 yard signs in 2016 saying vote for coffee. And I'm reusing them for this campaign. So I need to report that as an in-kind contribution to the current campaign. I'm using those in-kind fields in the self-contribution tab. You've entered everything properly, click that submit button. And then, as always, hit the save button at the end. So do we have any questions about, really any contribution questions?
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Go back. Now, a Form C7, and the 16 days only applies to this upcoming primary election. But all candidates, the last filing period before the primary election will end for candidates on May 14th. So from May 15th to June 2nd, you need to use a Form C7 to report any contribution of $100 or more from a single source. So if you receive $100 on May 25th from Uncle Louie, you're going to be reporting that $100 contribution to your campaign using a Form C7, add new C7, and then enter that contribution information like you would any other contribution. The Form C7 will be sent to us and it'll automatically be saved in your next C5. So you do not have to report it twice. But the Montana Disclose Act requires all activity from the beginning of the campaign through the date of the election. The Form C7, and we'll talk about a Form C7E for expenditures here in a second. The Form C7 allows you to report relevant contributions to the date of the election. So there's full transparency under the Disclose Act. We will, as we get closer to that period, we will send out reminders to all candidates and their treasurers that that the Form C7 or Form C7E is necessary between this date and election date. So keep that in mind. It's nothing you have to worry about today. If you have questions as we get into that period, feel free to contact the compliance specialist in my office, either by phone or email. I'm more than happy to walk you through that process. But it's just a reminder of your responsibility in that period right before the election. Oops, so you got to get to the right. So it must be filed within 2 business days of receiving the contribution. I don't think I mentioned that. Okay, and I think we just asked, is there any questions at all on contributions?
Yes, we've got 2. First is, if you don't have a primary, you have to file a C7 this May.
Yes.
And the second question is, do yard signs depreciate in value over time?
I would imagine that they do, and it's common. I would imagine they do. Again, I can't. If you want to report it as the full value that you paid for it 2 years ago, you certainly can. It's the reporting that's, if it's, as long as it's accurate and it makes sense. You may have bought yard signs you never used and stood in the garage, so when you put them up, they may have that same value. So again, that's a question for a campaign and a candidate. Generally, we see, a lesser value as those years go by. Again, just use common sense, and if it makes sense, it's generally accepted. So we'll talk about reporting expenditures and social media, everyone's favorite topic. Adding an expenditure is fairly simple in CSRS. Again, when you go to your campaign finance report, you're going to see an expenditures tab, and there's only there's two sub tabs under expenditure. One is the expenditures themselves, and then a help tab. You again can use the entity search function. It'll default to row details where you can add manually. You can use the entity search function. You'd select business, select the entity name. For example, this shows Facebook. You search all campaigns, it'll bring up the information for Facebook. You see Facebook one hacker way. For those of you who haven't reported Facebook before, that is the correct address for Facebook. It is not a spoof. But you could also enter into row details every vendor in individually. Other things you'll see when you log in to add in an expenditure, you'll see an updated fields now with the new user interface. Not only you see description of expense, but we've also made it easier to report details of common expenditures such as paid communications, the things that are required by rule and or law, such as the platform, quantity, and subject matter of the communications that you are reporting. We'll show you specific examples, and it should be pretty clear here in a few minutes. On our website, you'll find a lot of guidance as far as what purpose, quantity, subject matter means, and you have to always remember that if you have like expenditures, that you provide enough detail that we can distinguish them between the between other expenditures of the same kind. So, for example, we don't want flyers, $1,000 or flyers, $500, flyers, $1,200. You need enough information to distinguish what those flyers are. So 1,200 flyers, subject matter, economic development, and then the amount. A common expenditure if you're renting office space for the campaign, rather than just rent, you would March rent, April rent, May rent. That is enough detail to distinguish between like expenditures. It becomes even more important when you're talking about social media and other paid communications, which we'll spend a lot of time on. Those are the majority of the expenditures campaigns will be reporting in their finance reports. When you add an expense, here's a copy of what the fields that you're going to see: vendor or first or last name or vendor name, address, the amount. There's a selection: is this an over contribution limit refund? Scott talked about that earlier with that example. If you receive $200 and you're refunding 20 of that back, you would select that box, for example. Description of the expense, and then these are common for all paid communications, but might also be relevant in other expenditures. Just again, it's kind of a common sense thing. The platform, quantity, and subject matter. Here's we have right in the form itself, we have examples of paid communications and how you would report those. And then a couple of tips. Then you hit submit, and the same process, you'll see save, success, and you'll see that expenditure within the field. We're going to come back to the C7E, and we're going to go move right into social media reporting. Social media needs to be reported just like any other media or any other communication that your campaign would be reporting. So if you're reporting a newspaper ad, you're reporting to us the number of newspaper ads you put in, the amount that you paid for them, and a description of what that ad was about. The same with TV, the same with your printed materials. Social media is no different. The only difference is you generally have a more of a in control, and you're doing it from your phone or your tablet or your home computer, instead of using a salesman or someone outside your home. You would report the description field, describe the expenditure. You're going to include the platforms, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Google banner ad, the quantity. When you're reporting social media expenditures, the quantity is simply the date range that you within the reporting period that you had the ad or boost going. A unique subject matter description, for example, economic development, education, Medicaid expansion, public lands, tax policy, fishing access, hunting license fees, you know, whatever the ad or paid communication was about, that's how you describe it. And again, as with all, enough detail to distinguish between like expenditures. Generally, if you're providing the subject matter, that's enough detail to distinguish between, 3 different Facebook ads: Facebook ad economic, Facebook ad tax policy, Facebook ad Medicaid expansion. That's enough detail.
And just to clarify, this is only for ads that you are paying to boost or promote. If you can put as many Facebook posts on your page, just organic, non-paid activities as you want. You do not have to report any of those activities. If you're not paying for it, you do not have to report it with us. But if you are paying to boost, you are paying to promote, you're paying to get this image or this ad out in the internet, so more eyeballs see it, that is what you need to report, and that's where that detail comes into play.
If we go there's lots of resources on our website. If you go to politicalpractices.mt.gov/paid communications, you'll see a lot of information on everything we're talking about today and more, including PDFs, graphics, and other examples of how to properly report on those communications. It's not that difficult when you get started. Just think of your own experience when you go to your mailbox, for example, on a busy day before the election, and you may pull out 2 or 3 different mailers from the same candidate. How do you distinguish between those 3 mailers? One's talking about his family, one's talking about Medicaid expansion, one's talking about tax policy. So if you think about it like that, and what a constituent would look at when they're looking at that, that's how you would report it. When you add a Facebook expense, for example, when you log in, we've already provided some examples of that. You could use the entity search, find Facebook. It's going to pull up Facebook's information. You're going to put in the date that you started that Facebook boost, for example, the amount that you spent, $200, a description of the expense, single Facebook ad, ran multiple days, platform Facebook, quantity, ad ran from 3/3 to 3/10, and again on 3/12. The subject matter in this case was "Nope knows what's best for Montana." That was the name of the ad. You would hit submit. Yep, we're going to talk about that. You hit submit, and then would go into that again, that save, success, and we'll show you that actually now.
Yeah, we can do that now.
Yeah. Now we'll get back to I want you to put regular expenditure too, Scott.
So since we're doing great on time, I'm going to add a Facebook expenditure and a non-Facebook expenditure and kind of walk you through the similarities and differences in reporting those. So to add any expenditure, you go to the expenditures tab. So right next to contributions. To add a new expenditure, you just click the add button like you would for any contribution. You're defaulted to row details. If you want to use the entity search, you can use the entity search. Again, you are not required to use the entity search. I'll use the row details for this one, and I'll use the entity search for the next one I enter. So for entity type, if it's a bank, choose bank. If it's a business, choose business. If it's an individual, choose individual. For the most part, the most common entity type is business. There is some individual selection, and in much more rare instances, bank is selected. So just pick the one that's appropriate. Election type, if the expenditure is made in the primary, choose primary. If the expenditure is made in the general, choose general. Date is the date where the expenditure was made. Business name, you type in the name of the business. Street address, you give the street address. And then city, state, and zip is all pretty self-explanatory, just where the business is located. The amount is the amount of the expenditure made. So however much you paid, that's what you type into this amount field. And if it's a refund of somebody who contributed an amount to you that's over the contribution limit, you can check that, is this an over contribution limit refund box? If it's not a refund of a contribution limit issue, don't check that box. Description of expense is really where you kind of get to tell us what the material was. So something like printing and mailing works well for that. Platform, if it's a Facebook ad, put Facebook. If it's a television ad, put television. Radio ad, put radio. This was a printed material that was mailed in this example, so I'm going to say mail. Quantity is for a mailing would be the number of items printed and distributed. For a social media ad, for example, would be the dates that the post was boosted. For a television ad, it would be the dates that that television ad is available. Same for radio, newspaper, that type of thing. We're going to say we printed 1,000 of these. And then the subject matter is just a brief description of what the ad is actually about. So this is where you provide the information that allows us and interested individuals to differentiate between different ads. So for example, if I just said mailing and went ahead and submitted that report like that, you would get a notice from a CoPP compliance specialist asking for more detail, because say you had another mailer out, or you had another printed material, or anything like that. Somebody would say, I can't tell the difference between this, or I'm just looking at his report, how am I supposed to know what that expenditure was? If you just put mailing, we don't know what that expenditure was. So instead of being generic like that, you need to provide a little bit of detail. Oops. So if you said something like coffee is coming to Helena fundraiser invites, that way we know, okay, it's an invite to the Helena fundraiser, or it's an invite to this event or that event. That's the type of detail we're looking for printed material type of things.
Or candidate bio mailer, candidate economic policy. So whatever your mailer or whatever your communication is about, that information would go there. Then it makes sense when you have the quantity and the platform. People, folks reading your campaign finance report can understand what that communication was about and when was it out.
And so, and we have these examples down kind of at the bottom of the page after you've entered all information. Campaign mailer, 5,000 printed and mailed candidate biography. That would be an absolutely perfect way to describe a mailed expense. So once you've entered everything, just like with contributions, you hit that submit button. And then the save button. Again, I have to stress, please hit the save button after every entry. That is very important with the SIR system. So that's how you would enter just a like printed material, a non-Facebook material. And I'm going to show you an example of a Facebook expenditure too. So it is the same process. You still go to the expenditures tab and you still click that add button. For Facebook, I would recommend using the entity search. Select business and just search for Facebook. I can guarantee Facebook's going to come up with a result. If it doesn't for your campaign, make sure that search all campaigns is clicked and hit search again. I'll show you what happens when we do that. It's going to come up with dozens of results. Lots of people have entered Facebook as an entity. So it's going to come up from the entity search. So go ahead and click the box next to the one with the one hacker lane address. Hit select. Again, the election type, if it's a primary expense, put primary. If it's general, put general. Date is, again, the date the expenditure was made.
The date you incurred the expenditure, and we'll talk about that more in a minute.
Correct. We'll talk about that in a minute. The amount is the amount of the expense. And then it's all the same, description of the expense. This is all the same detail that was asked for on a mailed ad. It's still the same for a Facebook ad. You still need to put in all that same information. Really, the only difference is quantity would be the date that you paid to boost the ad.
To whatever the date range.
Yeah, the date range. So if it's boosted for more than one day, for example, you could say boosted 3/11 to 3/13. If it's just a one day, you could put boosted 3/11 only, just so we know what that date range is. That's what you want to put in quantity. And then again, subject matter is just a very brief actually, I'm going to change this a little bit. So it could be, meet Coffee's family, coffee bio, outdoor recreation policy, fishing license fee thing. It can be very, very brief. Outdoor rec is vital to Montana's economy, as an example we have. It can really be that brief. That's really all the information people need to tell these ads apart from each other, believe it or not. So when you're done, you hit that submit button, and then you hit the save button. And so again, really the only difference between a Facebook or other social media paid ad and a more traditional mailing, newspaper ad, etc., is the entity would be different, and then quantity, instead of a fixed number, maybe a date range.
Questions on reporting expenditures and or social media expenditures? We're going to be so we'll save any of those kind of questions for a minute. Any expenditure questions?
We actually have two questions about contributions.
Okay, that's fine.
The first is, are out-of-state contributions acceptable?
Yes.
Yes, they are subject to the contribution limit, of course, but they are acceptable.
Sure. And if a PAC from out of state makes a contribution in Montana, they have to report that to CoPP, correct?
Correct.
Correct. The PAC would have their own reporting and disclosure requirements. That is something that they would have to deal with. That's not necessarily the candidate's responsibility, as long as the candidate reports their part of that activity. It'd be up to the PAC to register.
Sure. And then the last question. Does the system still give an erroneous over contribution limit warning when the candidate makes self contributions in excess of the individual contribution?
So we actually had somebody bring that up this morning before we headed over. If you use the self tab to do a candidate contribution, that message will not appear because the system knows there's no limit from the candidate. You can report a contribution from yourself, the candidate, using that individuals tab, but it is going to come up with that message if you go over the contribution limit, because at that point the system thinks you are an outside individual.
Yeah, that's why when we updated the system, we included the self tab, and why you want to use under the loan tab. If it's a loan, use candidate's information button. We're going to go ahead and continue on. Just some particularly larger campaigns, if you do several, for example, several Facebook ads in the reporting period, you can report that with an addendum, but with all the specificity. Here's an example. Facebook ad, see addendum. Facebook ad buy ran the 2.2 to 3.2, see addendum, and submit. Just make sure if that's what you're doing, if you're going to use this option, that you turn around and send us an addendum with in the subject matter in the email, addendum for the campaign C5 covering this period, covering the reporting period that you filed it, and which expenditure it's amending or addendum for, and then include all the information you would have included in those individual expenditures. Add 1, economic policy, the dates it ran, the amount. Add 2, public safety plan, the amount, the dates it ran, the amount, etc. So you can also include it as an addendum or as an attachment if it's in an Excel sheet or a Word document, etc. But you need to, you cannot, if you place the word addendum in your finance report, I better see an addendum when that report is filed.
And please, when you send an addendum, please give us the name of the candidate the addendum is for, the reporting period, and what expenditure it goes to. We very frequently get addendums that are missing one piece of that information, if not every piece of that information. And so as compliance specialists, we don't know whose report it is, for example, or what expenditure it goes to. If someone were to complain about that or say you're missing that information, we wouldn't know that you gave it to us because we don't know that you did. We just know somebody gave us something. We may ask you to provide an addendum describing that because, again, we don't know you already did that. We just know somebody gave us something. And in that case, we can't correlate it back to you.
Yeah. Best practice, add them in individually, but that's an option for campaigns. Some folks don't understand or don't realize that they can find information about their activity on Facebook just through their own Facebook page. So anymore, if you go to your promotions tab on your Facebook page, you can find any paid promotions or ads that your page is responsible for. So just as that means, what that also means is citizens can look at that and the media can look at that. So if it shows on your page that you have had several paid communications on Facebook and your campaign finance report doesn't reflect those social media, Facebook ads, that's a potential campaign violation for non-reporting. And again, everybody can see just by traveling to your page. Facebook's fairly transparent that way. If you're unsure where to find the information to properly report your Facebook spending, everyone has an ads manager that's just unique to them and how they're paying for their own ads. Select that button and it'll take you to your ads manager, which certainly has all the information that's required for reporting, the date, the subject matter, the amount, plus a lot of information that you may or may not be interested in as far as who has seen your ad, how many impressions it received, etc. We don't need any of that information. We just want the information we just spoke about. Ad transparency on Facebook today. What you will see when you log into an ad detail on a page, you'll see a variety of information, including the now Facebook requires their attribution, which is just a paid for by. They make you place their attribution on their page, which is a good step. Just remember, just because Facebook has an attribution, that doesn't mean it meets Montana's attribution statute and laws. You have to have a full Montana attribution, which we'll talk about in just a second. The ad details also pulls up information from your Facebook page's about section. So we think it's always a good idea that in additional info under your About section that you place a full attribution for your campaign. We're going to write into attribution. If you have questions about attribution, just go to politicalpractices.mt.gov/attribution. You will find everything you need to know and more about Montana's attribution law. And we'll talk a little bit about that now as far as Facebook. And like I said, they'll make you place paid for by the candidate's name on Facebook, but your full attribution is a candidate's name, address, and party affiliation. So
What does
just because you have the
attribution mean?
Facebook attribution on there, we suggest there's a couple of easy ways that you can make sure that you stay in compliance with Montana's attribution law. Is in your page, go ahead and when you upload your cover photo, go ahead and add an attribution to your cover photo. Most phones, mobile phones, tablets, and home computers, photo program, just the basic photo program has the ability to add text to a photo. Take advantage of that, and before you upload that photo, include the attribution. Here's a stock photo that we used. We pulled it off a free stock site, and we just added an attribution to it. Paid for by J Coffee, P.O. Box, with the coffee party symbol. And if I ever go to boost this page to get more people attracted to my page or likes, they show the cover photo. My attribution, full attribution is always there.
What is an attribution?
Facebook events are another common area where candidates utilize Facebook and pay to boost their events for fundraisers and other candidate events. Again, a couple of ways you can do it is if you're uploading an image for your event, place the attribution on the image. Or just in the details section when you're typing in the details for your event, just go ahead and throw your attribution right down at the bottom. You can see here, paid for by J Coffee, P.O. Box, Helena, Coffee Party. So simple way to do it. That way, once you put it in and you decide to boost the event, because they make it really easy. Oh, I want to boost this event. You're already covered because you've already put in an attribution. Questions on attribution?
And just to clarify on attribution too, it's not only Facebook posts or social media posts that require that attribution.
Yep.
Really, any paid material you're distributing requires that attribution. So a mailer would require it. A flyer would require it. A baseball cap would require it. Anything like that.
Questions, Sam?
Just one. I had someone who doesn't have the chat who was just asking for clarity as to what an attribution is generally.
An attribution is where a person looking at a paid communication can find out who paid for that particular communication. So whether often if there's a number of things out there on a candidate, if the candidate paid for it, it'll say paid for by the candidate. But let's say, the political party may have put out an independent expenditure piece. They're required to put their attribution on it. So if you're looking at two different communications that both discuss the same candidate, you can determine who paid for each piece. We're going to talk about a couple of more on debts and payments on debts. Another common reporting error in finance violation is that folks do not report their expenditures at the time that they're incurred. You need to report your expenditures and the time they're incurred. You do not wait until you receive an invoice and pay at the time of the invoice. So if you buy signs from a local vendor and on March 1st, and they say, John, we'll send you the bill and you're not going to get that bill till after the reporting period on, say, March 30th, you need to report it as a debt when you incurred that expense on March 1st. And you do that using the debt. We'll show you here in a second, the debt tab. Do not wait until you pay that invoice. It's a common reporting mistake. It needs to be reported at the in the period, the reporting period that the expense was incurred. You'll see a debts tab, debt loan payment. You add the debt, and you'll have the you'll add the same information you do for any other expenditure, quantity, subject matter, etc. If you don't know the amount, you can estimate it and then amend that at a later date. The important part is that you're reporting within the period that you incurred the expense. Report debts with the same level of detail as the expenditure. It's a little bit different. You'll see the purpose of the debt. You'll have to put everything within that description field. So the same things we talked about with expenditures, you'll just write it all at the same time under that purpose of debt field. You can report on debt payments when you make payments or pay that debt. You simply go to the payments tab. You'll find the debt that was previously reported, select that and make a payment on that debt and show the payment at that point. Questions? No? Okay. Additional reporting info. Again, we ask that you get into the habit of starting your campaign finance report at the beginning of the reporting period and update throughout that reporting period. It'll make it easier for you. It won't put you under the gun on the last day of filing. It'll allow you to reach out to my staff and ask questions if necessary. And it's just a lot more comfortable. It's a lot more comfortable process, believe me, for you if you're not scrambling to get a report in on the last date, on the last day of filing. For example, that's a good time to talk about reporting. Just change the reporting dates in the last legislature to make it a bit easier for candidates to organize how they report. Candidates now report on the 20th of the 3 months prior to the election and the month of an election. So you will report on the 20th of March, April, May, and June, August, September, October, and November. So it's really easy to remember. The reporting periods go up to the 14th or 15th of that month. You'll see it in the reporting calendars on the website. Really easy to put in a tickler file on your Google Calendar or on your kitchen calendar. You can follow us on Facebook. We put in our reporting dates, due dates as events. So if you're following us on Facebook, you'll automatically be delivered a message that the commissioner has an event coming up. Your reports are due. So it's a kind of a gentle reminder through your social media. But please don't wait until the last date to create and file your report. And just a reminder, the data is not public until you have filed the report. To file the report, and we're actually going to file today's report because, again, the report period ended for this current period on Sunday, March 15th, and the report is due on Friday, March 20th. So we're going to, since we're in the middle of this report, we do not have another training before the end of this period. We're going to go ahead and file the report today. You're going to go to the certify and you're going to go to the file tab, and you'll see certify and file sub tab, and you're going to see a couple of different buttons. This first button, if you check that, it will display the names and addresses of contributors who contributed under $35 that you placed in that individual tab. It is not necessary to check that box. If you leave that box unchecked, those under 35 contributors that you placed in the individual tab will be shown as a mass contribution. This box, the second box, you check only if you're closing the report. You're not going to close your report until well after the primary if you lost, or well after the general if you won or lost. So do not check this box by mistake and file the report. It'll close out your report, your activity with us.
You will no longer have access
Yes.
to file future reports
Right.
if you check that
So-
box.
Only use that at the very end of your campaign. And finally, the box that you do want to pay attention to is the certification. You're going to click this and certify that the report is true, complete, and correct to the best of your knowledge in accordance with campaign finance law. And you're going to hit the certify and file button, which we'll show you in just a second. Once you do that, the report will be filed with us. You will receive an email that says your report was filed. And we always suggest that double check before you hit file, certify and file. But once you've filed it, go ahead and review your report. Walk through it, make sure you didn't make any mistakes. And perhaps you put 50 when you meant to put 500 as a quantity, for an example. You can easily go back, update and amend that report and refile it. So just get in the habit of doing some of those easy things that you can do to make sure that the report is being filed correctly. Why don't we go in and file this report, Scott?
Yep, we can do that.
Oh,
So as Jeff was saying, to file the report, you use this File tab. So you click over to the File tab, and it will give you these messages here. Before we do that, I'm going to check the Summary tab to make sure I entered everything correctly. So basically, what the Summary tab shows you is cash and bank balance for previous report. That's your starting balance for this reporting period. Since this is our first report, our starting balances are 0. Receipts shows that's an aggregate of all cash and check contributions received during this time period. It pulls them all together to that one number. Expenditures, total paid out this period, that's the total amount of expenditures you had reported paying during this period. And so cash and bank is your ending cash and bank. So that's how much cash you have left at the end. I recommend before filing, check the summary tab to make sure these numbers are correct. We do get lots of calls about, oh, my report is wrong. I received $25,000 during this period and it only shows $1,735. An easy way to check against that is to check the summary tab before you file to make sure you actually entered everything correctly. It kind of helps you catch, maybe you entered a decimal point somewhere you weren't supposed to, or you put 10 instead of 100. Things like that can be figured out pretty easily by using this summary tab to make sure the numbers look right. Assuming your numbers look right and you're ready to file, you would proceed to the File tab. You can check this box to display the name and address of contributors who have contributed less than 35. So if you want them to show up individually in your report, those under $35 contributors you added in the individual contributors tab and contributions, you can check that box. If you don't check it, and you do not have to check it, it just masses them all together. Basically, the system shows it as one large contribution for whatever their total number is, and without giving the names of those folks. If you are closing, finally a closing report, so say you've withdrawn from a race, that would be the only real circumstance for this report where you'd check it. You can check this box to file a closing report. Again, once you check that box and file a closing report, you will no longer have access to filing reports. So unless you are actually absolutely done with campaign finance reports, please don't check the closing box. If you do that, you have to call or email us. We have to confirm that you're not closed, and we have to go reopen your campaign. If you do something like that on right before a filing day, for example, and then can't get in and file a new report because you'd already filed a closing report, we may not get to that before the deadline passes. So keep those kinds of things in mind. Please don't check that closing box unless you're actually closing. The certification is required. You do have to check this box to file. Basically, it's just a certification saying the things I have entered are true, complete, and correct to the best of my knowledge. So I'm not intentionally not reporting something or fuzzing the numbers here and there. I've entered I've entered the actual honest truth into this report. So once you check that box, you have the option to certify and file. If you click that certify and file button, it's going to come up with another warning asking, do you wish to continue? If you think, oh gosh, I think I did mess something up here, you can always hit cancel, which just takes you back to this page. If you don't have anything wrong, you think you're good to go, hit that continue button. Success. The candidate campaign finance report was successfully filed. You're going to see that message. You will also receive an email message. And that means you have filed the report. So it kicks you back to the candidate report list, which is where we were way back at the beginning when we started entering contributions about an hour and a half ago. Now you see the status says filed. So that means this report has been filed. It is now available to the public in the manner I filed it.
Almost done here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go through a couple of more things, and we'll take questions over the entire presentation. Before I forget, I want to go back. I had mentioned, we put this in really in the wrong space. I'd mentioned under contributions that it was required that you file a C7 for contributions of $100 before the last reporting date prior to an election and election date. The same goes for an expenditure of over $100 or more by the campaign. It must be filed using a C7E. Use different C7 is contributions, C7E expenditures, expenditure of over $100 or more. Within 2 business days of making that expenditure in those last days of the campaign. Again, we'll be sending out reminders of that period coming up. If you add you'll add a new C7E, that expenditure will automatically be placed in your next C5 report. You do not have to include that twice. So back to where I was. And just so you know, if you go in and you'll see there is an upload function. The upload function is not a general upload for documents, PDFs, images, etc. It's a very specific way to upload a lot of data into the report that needs templates from our office. It's very technical. It needs to be precise and followed specifications. Larger campaigns use this. They actually create their own software. We ask that please do not use or try to use this function unless you understand the complexities involved in it. But you can get that information from our office if that's something you want to attempt. For most campaigns, majority of Montana campaigns using the process that we just went through in this workshop works just fine for practically every candidate. What to expect when you file your campaign finance report. At some point after you file with us, we're required to review campaign finance reports. We'll do a cursory inspection, and you may receive a compliance inspection report with suggestions of potential areas that you may want to go back and update or take a look at. Please accept these for the spirit of which they're intended. They're intended to make sure you're reporting correctly with enough detail. They're not meant to be anything other than us providing guidance to your campaign. We've had some people that get upset when they get them, thinking we're telling them they're doing something wrong. I hope people do not look at that process, particularly if you know our staff. We're here to help you report correctly and completely. These are just a good tool for your campaign to use to report to us. Chances are, if you follow our guidance in these things, you're very, very unlikely to receive any kind of campaign finance violation or complaint. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but this is one way to assist in making sure that that doesn't happen. If a complaint is filed in our office, it's filed in a complaint form such as this. If that happens to your campaign, our office, when we receive a complaint, we make a review of the complaint. If we accept the complaint, we start an investigation. A majority of complaints are dismissed. But if there is an issue that we need to resolve, or we will work with the candidate in the campaign to get that to make those recommended changes. If it stays within our jurisdiction, we will work with the campaign in a settlement to resolve the sufficiency decision. Most complaints are dismissed. If your campaign does receive a complaint, you will receive a call from me. We'll walk you through that process so you understand it. It's just the way that we set that up in our office. We try not to have anybody surprised in any kind of fashion, and we want you to understand what the process is, so you can work with our office to get the issue resolved. The resources, you'll find plenty of resources on our campaign website. Candidate committee information. Below that, there's an education and resource tab. You'll find everything you need to know: services, forms, calendars, limits, etc. So familiarize yourself with our campaign site. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Montana CoPP. If you follow us on Facebook, like I said, we put those events in. And you'll be reminded by Facebook when a due date is coming up for a campaign finance report, for example. So, and again, we'll send you back. We'll just end with that candidate and treasurer guide to navigating CSRS is available online. So please utilize that, or call our office, contact our office. More than happy to work with you through this process.